Díomh chorda agus gurb míle maith go bhfasach an chur chun caintliv nómh. It's lovely to be here with you, though I'll admit I still sometimes wonder how I end up in these privileged positions. It probably has something to do with the fact that I'm an aging, slightly nerdy millennial who remembers my first time using Windows 95 on a desktop computer, spending hours playing Snake on my dad's complete block of a mobile phone, and beginning but not completing my European computer driving license journey in the computer room of Gael School Bhean Tree, and at one point finding a community of friends in an online game that supported me through some difficult times. I was lucky, really. I grew up both without digital technology and through its key moments of emergence. That experience, I think, gave me a lifelong curiosity about it, a sense of both its remarkable possibilities and profound risks. And that's really what brings me to today, and to the title of this session, AI in Schools Shaping Our Digital Futures. Because this isn't just a talk about technology, it's a conversation about how we as leaders shape the relationships between people and intelligent tools, between the digital and the deeply human. Somewhere along the way, I seem to have earned a reputation for offering a balanced perspective on AI, and hopefully today will be no different. Maybe that's how I ended up here after all, though part of me suspects an administrative error somewhere along the line. The kind that only an AI could confidently make, as Anton clearly demonstrated from there as well. But genuinely, it's an honour, because the people in this room are the heartbeat of Irish education. You lead learning, communities and care, and you do it in conditions that the world challenging doesn't even begin to describe. Thankfully, I was able to join you for some of the first day of the conference yesterday. Its theme, reflection, invited us to look back at what has shaped us, our systems, our values, our traditions, in some instances our sheer stamina. And when you look at the IPPN Sustainable Leadership Report, reflection becomes sobering. Principals spoke of overwhelming workload, emotional strain, administrative avalanche. The data showed what many of you are already feeling every day, that leadership in the Irish schools is becoming unsustainable. So before we talk about technology, it's worth acknowledging that truth. Because when we talk about AI in schools, we're not talking about gadgets or gimmicks, mostly at least. We're talking about whether technology might give back time, restore focus, make leadership livable again, and perhaps even allow us to imagine new possibilities in education. But also, and this is important, whether it might quietly take things from us if we're not careful. Because make no mistake, we may be living through the largest unregulated experiment in human history. Generative AI wasn't rolled out slowly, cautiously, or ethically. It was just released into the world. No control group, no ethics board, no clear playbook. Just a global experiment in how we think, learn, and trust information. And the truth is that experiment has already reached our schools, whether we've invited it or not. So last Christmas, I couldn't resist the opportunity to work in a reference to Mariah Carey defrosting in the lead up to Christmas. If you know, you know. If you don't get the reference, I do apologize. Look it up after. It's totally worth it. But let's start again. So last Christmas, I was at my brother's house, and my niece, she's 10, asked a question that none of us could answer for certain. I can't even remember what it was now, probably something very important like whether or not Taylor Swift writes her own songs. But being the responsible adult I am, I reached for my phone and I asked ChatGPT. And my niece looked at me quite unimpressed and said, "Oh, we've used that in school." And I had one of those moments. I turned to her and said, "Oh, dear sweet child, you've no idea what you've gotten yourself into right now. Come over here and sit next to your uncle." And then I proceeded to interrogate her for about 10 minutes. Who showed you? What did you ask? Did your teacher know? What instructions did they give you? What was the purpose of the activity? What did it say? Did you believe it? And by the time I asked my last question, she just rolled her eyes in the way only a 10-year-old can and just said, "Can I go back and play with my Christmas presents now?" And that was the moment I realized this isn't coming down the tracks, it's already here. It's in our homes, our classrooms, our children's language. The question isn't if AI will shape education, it's how, why, and by whom. Which brings us to today, day 2, reimagine. Because reflection tells us where we've been, but imagination helps us decide where we're going, and there are decisions and choices we can make. So over the next 40 minutes, I want to explore how we, as school leaders, can approach this moment, not with fear or fatigue, though those feelings are understandable, but with agency, imagination, and leadership. How we might shape our digital futures rather than be shaped by them. So with that being said, I wanted to do a quick temperature check on how everyone was feeling right now. So if we could swap over to the Menti, hopefully we got a few responses in. And okay, we've got I was actually expected to be a little bit more balanced. I was like going to say to everyone, can you do exactly what I was expecting you to do. In a room of 20, I can adapt, but with this kind of a crowd, it makes it a bit more nerve-wracking. But we've actually got a fair few people saying that it's curious but cautiously slow and excited, lots of potential here. And a few other people highlighting a bit of skepticism, trying to stay calm until it settles down. And I'm very surprised at how few people have actually selected how overwhelming it is. I get those feelings a lot from everyone. And what I was hoping you would get from this is that there is a mixture of feelings and it's okay to hold multiple ones at any given time. Can we swap back to the slides, guys? Just waiting. There we go. So I know in some form or another, a lot of people in this room probably do have some form of AI fatigue. Maybe you've gotten used to actually engaging with it yourself, but we're dealing with its consequences in education right now. And it's so incredibly challenging to keep up with everything. And in many ways, that is literally my job. So believe me when I say I feel for you. But what I hope to do with this talk is perhaps rejuvenate our collective thinking around this technology to try and move from fatigue to action. But before we can imagine the future, we need to take some of the mystery and maybe a bit of the mythology out of the present. AI has gathered this aura around it, half miracle, half monster. Depending on what headline you read, it's either going to save education or destroy civilization. So I want to spend a few minutes just taking the heat out of it to understand what this technology actually is and isn't. To look behind the AI curtain. Because when we understand something, we get our agency back. And that's really important. We can't lead what we don't understand, and understanding gives us agency. We don't need to become coders or data scientists, but we do need to feel confident enough to make wise decisions for our schools. So let's start with some plain English language. Here's a quick translation guide. Think of it as a jargon detox. When people say AI or artificial intelligence, they're talking about computers doing things we'd usually associate with human thinking. Spotting patterns, making predictions, solving problems. That's the big umbrella term, and everything else you're going to see here is covered by that. Next up is machine learning, or ML. It's one way that AI can actually learn. It's when we feed a system lots of examples, millions or billions of them, so we can start recognizing patterns and make its own guesses. If you've ever had Netflix recommend a show or your phone predict a word, that's machine learning quietly doing its thing. Underneath that is neural networks, the real engine behind it all. And this is a technique within machine learning. They're inspired by how the human brain works, layers of digital neurons passing information along. It's a flattering comparison, but don't worry, your brain still wins by a long shot. So that's the foundation. Neural networks are part of machine learning is a part of artificial intelligence. From there, AI branches out into its senses. So natural language processing, or NLP, is the part that deals with language. Reading, writing, translating, responding. That's what powers chatbots, translation tools, and writing assistants. And then there's computer vision, which helps machines see. Recognizing faces, reading handwriting, or identifying objects through smart glasses and cameras. And now over the last few years, another branch has exploded, generative AI, which uses all the techniques we've identified earlier. Instead of just analyzing information, it creates new things. Text, images, music, even video, all based on what it's learned from existing data. This is where tools like ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini live, what we would call general purpose models. Not built for a single task, but adaptable to almost anything. Large language models, or LLMs, are a specific kind of generative AI that deal purely with language. They're trained on enormous amounts of text, think libraries of the internet, so they can mimic how people use and produce language. They're not thinking, they're not predicting, they're predicting the most likely next word one at a time. That's the type of AI sitting behind ChatGPT. Next came large multimodal models, or LMMs. The next step in that evolution. They can do everything an LLM can, but they can also see and listen. They can read a question, look at an image, and make sense of both together. That's what powers features like image analysis, smart glasses, or real-time translation apps. Then there was the rise of large reasoning models, or LRMs, the newest generation. They don't just predict or describe, they reason, and I put that in quotes for a reason. Instead of blurting out an answer, they think through a problem step by step, a bit like a student showing their work in maths class. And so then if we look at all of these and we kind of look at some of the quirks or features that might be associated with them, one that Anton perfectly demonstrated for us at the start here is hallucination. It's the AI version of being confidently wrong. It's when a model generates something that sounds perfectly plausible, but it isn't true. when it invents a quote or gives you a source that doesn't exist, all with total confidence. It's not lying on purpose, it just doesn't know it's wrong. Now, COT, or chain of thought, is how these models reason, or one of the techniques they try to get them to do it with. It's a technique that gets the AI to show its thinking, with writing out its steps before giving an answer. That often makes its responses more accurate and transparent. And another technique to help with that is what's called RAG, or retrieval augmented generation. It's when AI doesn't just rely on what it remembers, it looks up real information from trusted sources before responding. Think of it as giving your chatbot a library card. It can check the facts before answering, but it can still hallucinate. So that's the landscape, from the broad idea of AI all the way down to the newest, smartest models you'll be hearing out. It's much broader than that, but for what our purposes are and what we're looking at, this is what matters. It's as simple and as complex as that. And for most of what's touching education right now, lesson planning, admin help, assessment ideas, it's still the large language models doing the heavy lifting and are the foundation of all of these models. So let's take that one and unpack it a little more closely, because it's the kind of foundational to everything. So when you type a question or request into ChatGPT known as a prompt, like write me a policy draft or summarize this circular, it doesn't think about what you mean. It looks at billions of examples of language and calculates what word is most statistically likely to come next. It's not reasoning, it's pattern prediction. And think of it like the world's most advanced autocomplete. I'm simplifying it a bit, but that's one way to think about it. It's a bit like the student who can write a beautifully confident essay without actually understanding the question. It can sound impressive, sometimes even insightful, but really it's guessing based on patterns it's seen before. So AI is not intelligent in the way that we are. It doesn't know, it doesn't care, but it's extremely good at pretending to, which is fine so long as we remember that's what it's doing. Now, in the video, I always get to tell a joke for the audience, and if you've been to one of my talks before, this has kind of become one of the mainstays of my presentations. So we're going to do a little test. This is one of the bigger audiences I've had an opportunity to do this with, so hopefully the internet doesn't fail me now. Hey, ChatGPT, I'm giving a talk on AI to some primary school principals. Could you tell them a joke they might find funny?
Absolutely. All right, here's one you could share with them. Why did the robot go back to school? Because it heard it needed to improve its algorithms. Feel free to use that one and hopefully get a little chuckle.
You got no chuckle. A little chuckle.
Well, you know, sometimes the robot jokes are a bit of a slow burn.
Okay. We'll go with that. So we know at any stage it's not going to be a comedian anytime soon, right? And actually they just updated it last night, so I was kind of hoping it might have done better. But if it's not going to be a comedian anytime soon, it's worth thinking about what is it then? So generative AI models are not intelligent, they cannot reason, and they don't really know anything. At least in terms of how we define those terms in relation to humans. But it's remarkably good at simulating all three. That's why it's so convincing. It produces fluent, confident language. And we humans are wired to equate fluency with understanding. So we think, wow, it gets it. But really, it's just good at guessing what should come next. The trick is not to fall for the confidence of the output. Confidence is not the same as competence. So let's take a look at why it can sound so clever and sometimes be so wrong. Now, people may be familiar, maybe not, with the work of Emily Bender and her colleagues. They had a paper out on the dangerous stochastic parrots, which was hugely important. It pushed back at exactly the right time against the hype that surrounded AI. The idea that if you build a model big enough, you somehow get intelligence. The critique was necessary, because the history of AI is full of reductionist claims. The brain equals neurons, neurons equal computation, therefore intelligence equals computation. It's a neat story, but it's not the whole story. It reduces something profoundly human to the technical process. Now, Bender and her co-authors describe large language models as stochastic parrots, systems that remix language probabilistically, but don't really know what they're saying. They are synthetic text extruding machines, and they were right. Those metaphors help the world remember that prediction is not understanding. But it also becomes at times a kind of stick to beat anyone who dares to acknowledge the capability of these models, as if recognizing their usefulness means we've bought into the hype. The truth, as usual, sits somewhere in the middle. Yes, large language models predict the next word, like laying bricks, but saying a house is just a pile of bricks misses the architecture. There's a structure and a pattern emerging there that's worth paying attention to, even if it isn't intelligence as we know it. And that's where this conversation about reductionism really matters. Because when we say intelligence is nothing but computation, or AI is nothing but, we flatten the richness of what intelligence really is and could be. Real intelligence is emotional, moral, contextual, relational, all the things that make leadership in schools possible. That distinction matters because it's what keeps us in charge. So, if it isn't intelligent or sentient, why is everyone still talking about it? Well, because despite its limitations, these models in the right hands can be extraordinarily capable in a variety of areas, particularly where the task involves language or pattern recognition. Epoch AI here is an independent non-profit research institute. They're dedicated to collecting and analysing data on AI models, hardware and trends, so that policymakers, industry and the public can make better informed decisions about how AI is evolving and what it might mean for society. Part of their work is testing models on a variety of benchmarks, which you can see here. And when you test them on things like reading comprehension, science, math, even coding, they can perform at or above an average human level. And you can see over time performance is improving. You can see scaling up as you get further across to the right of the graph. But remember, that's in the test. It's not in the real world. These benchmarks are limited in multiple ways. They can pass exams, but they can't pass the test of context, tone, and common sense. The trick for us as leaders is to recognize where they add value and where they can't. So let's bring this down to ground level. What might this actually look like in your world? For teachers, it could be drafting lesson outlines or differentiating materials, generating quizzes, or even creating parent notes in another language. For principals, especially teaching principals, it might mean summarizing circulars, drafting policy updates, preparing newsletters, turning raw data into something usable for school self-evaluation. For both, it can act like a smart assistant, helping it with the first draft, a blank page, or the long-winded document. In other words, the kind of tasks that drain time but don't always need your professional judgment at the starting line. So let's do another quick test with ChatGPT in terms of its language capabilities. Hey, ChatGPT, could you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Of course. So I'm basically an AI created by...
Okay. En français, s'il vous plaît.
Bien sûr. Je peux faire ça en français sans problème.
Okay, another one. En español, por favor.
Claro. En español también, sin problema.
Okay, the real test. As cuelga le dahol.
No, samozřejmě. I po slovensky ti to
zvládnem. No. As cuelga in Irish.
Kierkegaard, as cuelga Martian. Martian, len or clickation, agus fragroig me.
And there you can see, sometimes it works, sometimes you need to work around with it or remind it. But the key thing to take from this is it's not replacing you. It's just offering to help with the paperwork so you can spend more time leading learning, not managing admin. I think that's the balance we have to hold on to. These systems can assist, they can accelerate, automate, and draft, but they can't lead. They don't have context, they don't have values, they don't understand community, care, or nuance. So our role as leaders is to keep those things central, to use the tools where they help, but never where they hollow out what makes leadership meaningful. Or to put it another way, machines can help with the admin so you can do the human. Now, before we go any further, let's acknowledge the elephant in the room. The fears around AI aren't overreactions, they're real. Data privacy, accuracy, bias, integrity, environmental and human impacts, what this means for human skill development, the pace of change. These fears are not insurmountable. Through a combination of education, design, and forward thinking, they can be mitigated, and we'll explore some of those a little later on, but they are legitimate. And schools are right to be cautious because our work is built on trust, and trust takes years to build and seconds to lose. But fear can also paralyze. It can make us freeze, waiting for someone else to decide. And the truth is, nobody's coming to do that thinking for us. So leadership isn't about removing fear, it's about acting wisely within it, staying curious, asking questions, and moving carefully forward. That's what discernment looks like. It's not panic, it's not blind optimism, it's the space between. And discernment is also the space between fear and action. That's the space leaders occupy, especially now, knowing when it can support and when it can diminish. We don't have to know everything about AI to lead wisely within it, but we do have to ask the right questions. Where's the data going? Who benefits? What's the impact on children and staff? This is where agency comes back in. We can't outsource discernment to an algorithm or a policy document. It's our professional judgment that turns technology into something ethical, safe, and useful. And if we can hold that mindset, curious, ethical, collective, then we're already leading the change instead of chasing it. So how do we think about all of this? Here's one idea that's really helped me. AI isn't a map of the future. It's a mirror. It doesn't show us where to go. it shows us who we are. These systems reflect the data we train them on, the questions we ask, and the values we bring. If we look for efficiency, we'll find efficiency reflected back. If we look for creativity, humanity, and inclusion, those are the things that we'll see. But these models also have a way of distorting us, facts and our realities, like the way a funhouse mirror does. So the real question isn't where is AI taking us, it's what do we want to see when we look into that mirror? Because that's the part we still control, and that's where imagination begins. So we've taken some of the mystery out of the technology, we've named the fears and reclaimed a bit of agency through understanding. Before we go further, take a breath. And no, we haven't come on to breathworks yet. Understanding helps us stand steady. But the real question is, what might we do with that steadiness? Because understanding doesn't move us forward, imagination does. So let's turn toward that next. So guys, can we bring up the next mentee there? I had asked everyone to do a word cloud of when you imagine the future of AI in schools, what's one word you hope defines it? So scary is up there, support, helpful, supportive, potential. Few of the smaller ones, collaborative, efficiency, exciting, innovation, assistance, transformative. We've got a few more coming in there again as well. And really, I think those are the kind of things that we need to try and hold on to, is in terms of there's so many scary things that can be associated with this technology, but there are so many things that we can hope for from it too. Can we swap back to the slides again? So I think those words as a whole say so much about who we are and what we value. They remind us that our hope is for the future isn't about technology itself, but about what it can enable. Curiosity, connection, care. So let's stay with that spirit for a moment, because this part of the conversation is where we look forward. We built the foundations, now we get to build the future. This next section is about imagination. Not fantasy, but foresight. And if there's one thing educators are good at, it's that. Every plan, every lesson, every act of leadership is a form of imagination, picturing a better possibility and helping others reach it. So let's bring that same mindset to AI and let's ask together, what kind of digital futures do we want to create for our schools, our staff, and our children? To answer that, I want to draw from the field of futures thinking. Futures thinking isn't about predicting the future, it's about preparing for it, learning to act with purpose in a landscape we can't fully know. In education, conversations about technology often slip into prediction, trying to guess which tool or company will win. But organizations like UNESCO and the OECD now frame this through strategic foresight, scanning multiple digital trajectories and deliberately steering them toward equitable public learning goals. Researchers such as Schlagwein call this digital futures, the systematic exploration of long-term possibilities shaped by technology. They argue that because digitalization constantly reopens what the future could be, we need purposeful, anticipatory practice, imagination with intent. Instead of asking what will happen, we ask what could happen, and even more importantly, what do we want to make happen? One simple way of thinking about this is through a horizons model. Horizon 1, the present, what's working now and what needs attention. Horizon 2 is the transition, the messy middle where new practices emerge and old ones adapt. Horizon 3 is the transformation, the visionary space, where we design the futures we hope for. The art of leadership is to keep all three in view at once, managing today, prototyping tomorrow, and imagining beyond. It's a way of saying we don't predict the future, we shape it. So what might those horizons look like in Irish education? So Horizon 1, the immediate future. This is the work of establishing guidance, confidence and guardrails, building understanding, ensuring safety, setting ethical boundaries. It's where the department's guidance in AI in schools lives. Clear principles around transparency, privacy, and human oversight. Horizon 2, the medium future, that's where experimentation begins. Embedding AI literacy across teaching and leadership, trialing new workflows, developing professional learning communities that explore what responsible use really looks like in practice. It's the messy, creative middle, and the most important horizon for culture change. And Horizon 3, the distant future. Here we get to dream a little. Imagine schools as centres of digital humanity, places where children learn with intelligent tools, but also learn to question them, where ethics and creativity sit at the heart of innovation. Managing today, prototyping tomorrow, imagining beyond. That's the rhythm of sustainable leadership. And we're not imagining in a vacuum. Ireland is beginning to design its AI digital future. Better late than never, even if there is still considerable work to do, particularly around the AI guidance. But alongside that, the AI literacy framework emerging from the European Commission and OECD gives language for competence and confidence, not just for pupils, but for teachers and leaders too. These frameworks start where they should, with learning and with values. They remind us that literacy precedes mastery. So you could think of it like this. You learn it, build literacy and understanding first, lead it, translate that understanding into school culture and policy, and then use it, and only then adopt and integrate the tools. Guidance creates the space, leadership gives it meaning. And that really is Horizon 1 in action, the groundwork for everything else that follows. Of course, imagination has to rest on evidence. Cognitive scientists talk about cognitive offloading, our tendency to outsource our thinking to external tools. We've done it for decades. We no longer memorize mobile phone numbers, and we let sat-navs remember routes for us. With generative AI, that risk goes deeper. We know that wholesale access to models for learners invites this. They heighten the risk of outsourcing all of their thinking and damage their learning. We can start offloading not just memory, but metacognition, our ability to think about our own thinking. Researchers call this metacognitive laziness, when the reasoning stops as soon as the output appears. And that doesn't just apply to students, that applies to adults, to leaders. The antidote isn't avoidance or prohibition, it's intentional design and use. Because some early research is showing us that intentionally developed tools can actually support learners while mitigating these risks. The question becomes, does this tool think for us or with us? When AI is designed to provoke reflection, to ask why and how instead of simply providing what, it doesn't have to erode metacognition, it can strengthen it. Key here is the development and cultivation of self-regulation strategies when using general purpose models like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, or Copilot. Thinking about what we can afford to offload and what tasks and outputs we evaluate and consider. It's process rather than product. How do we think with AI? For learners, access to general purpose models is risky, but models with guardrails can be developed. Here's what this looks like in practice. This example comes from Magic School, a platform many teachers are beginning to explore. They provide a suite of different AI-powered tools that educators can use out of the box. Rubric generator, MCQ quiz generator, text leveler, UDL choice board, joke generator. It has them all and many more. They ask you for a bit of info and then the magic supposedly happens. But it's not actually magic. They're just plugging your answers into their own hidden prompt templates and passing those along to OpenAI or Google to get the result. And I don't want this to be seen as a plug for the platform. There are elements I really don't like, as in some ways we're compounding the issues with general purpose models by having a third party filter our requests through their own designs and specifications of what is acceptable. At least with general purpose models, we maintain more control. However, they do have tools with guardrails that illustrate what I'm talking about here. They have the ability for teachers to open up rooms that pupils can access, and within those rooms, they can only access AI tools and bots that the teacher has placed in there. All of these can be customized. Take, for example, an AI tutor that has been set to only talk about the solar system. It doesn't allow the pupils to go off topic. It doesn't give them all the answers. It questions them about what they already know and what they want to learn about. And it scaffolds for them. It nudges the learner to think about their own thinking. That's the difference between automation and augmentation. One replaces, the other enriches. And that's the kind of design we should champion. AI that acts as a mirror for thought, not a shortcut past it. An opportunity to explore the limitations of the technology critically, because the goal isn't faster answers, it's deeper understanding. And there's another layer to this conversation, the systems themselves. AI doesn't have to mean big tech. Around the world, educators and researchers are developing open source, locally governed, ethical AI models, systems that are transparent, privacy first, and adaptable. These types of models can provide solutions to many of the fears and risks we've already previously identified. Imagine an Irish-hosted model trained on our curriculum documents, aligned with GDPR and child protection standards, governed by educators rather than algorithms. That would be genuine digital sovereignty. AI is a public good, not a private commodity. And these types of projects are emerging. The European Union, there's 2 European projects that have been developed, EU-based models that comply with the EU AI Act and can be adapted for different purposes. And it aligns perfectly with our values, collaboration, inclusion, community. The technology to do this already exists. What it needs is collective vision, a willingness to build tools that reflect our ethics, not just our efficiency. So let's pull these strands together. Futures thinking, policy, evidence, design, and ethics. And imagine, what if in the immediate future every school in Ireland could access a trusted Irish-hosted platform, transparent, secure, and designed around our values, not someone else's algorithm? A platform built for education, not advertising, handling the admin, freeing leaders to focus on learning. Or what if in the medium future our national AI literacy framework became the foundation for a new kind of professional learning, where every teacher, pupil, and parent understood not just how to use these tools, but how to question them, where AI literacy became as essential as reading or numeracy, part of what it means to be truly educated. And what if, in a more distant future, Ireland became known across Europe as the country that made digital education profoundly human, where technology amplifies care, inclusion, and creativity, and where children learn with intelligent systems, but never lose their own intelligence in the process? These aren't predictions, they're invitations, imperfect and not without their own flaws. However, they are futures that we could choose to build together. Apologies. But imagination on its own isn't enough. It needs leadership. Leadership that understands technology without being dazzled by it. Leadership that keeps ethics and empathy at the center. Because imagination without leadership can drift. And leadership without imagination can stagnate. The challenge is to hold both, to lead with foresight, integrity, and care. So let's look at what that kind of leadership really means in this moment. We're not talking about another initiative or another system. We're talking about how AI we think and act as leaders. About judgment, our ability to decide what's right, not just what's efficient. About discernment, recognizing when technology serves learning and when it risks hollowing it out. And about agency, leading with confidence and intention, not simply absorbing the next wave of tools. That's the kind of leadership this moment demands, grounded in values centered on people and guided by purpose. Leadership in education has always been a human act. It's about relationships, vision, and moral purpose. Yes, AI can process information, but leadership is about interpretation, about meaning, context, and consequence. Data might tell us what's happening, but only leadership can ask why it matters and what we should do about it. The late Sir Ken Robinson used to say that leadership is not command and control. It's climate control. It's about creating the conditions in which people can flourish, and that's where AI can help or hinder. If we use it well, it can give us time and focus to do the human work of leadership better. If we use it poorly, it could dehumanize us, dehumanize the very thing we're here to protect. And I'll come back to it again, but we can't ignore the context that all of this sits within. The IPPN Sustainable Leadership Progress Report made that painfully clear. It found principals were overworked, overstretched, and that the average sustainability rating for teaching principals was 2.88 out of 10. That's not a personal failing. That's a systemic one. So when we talk about AI in schools, this is where the real opportunity lies. Could technology take away some of the administrative weight, the endless paperwork, the things that stop leaders from leading? Even if it can, we need to ensure that it isn't used as a band-aid for the lack of support and underfunding. AI will never solve the human challenges of leadership, but used wisely, it could make leadership livable again. And that's what I mean by efficiency for purpose, not efficiency for its own sake. And at the heart of leadership sits judgment, the professional act of deciding what's right, not just what's possible. And that's where discernment comes in. Discernment is the pause before judgment, the capacity to slow down, to notice context, to weigh values, and to see consequences. In an age of intelligent tools, that pause becomes more important than ever, because the faster the tools become, the slower our thinking sometimes needs to be. Machines can analyze data, but only people can understand meaning. Machines can present options, but only leaders can take responsibility for outcomes. That's professional discernment, and it's something no algorithm can automate. Now, thankfully, we're not starting from zero. There are strong policy frameworks to support us if we use them well. I've previously mentioned the national level Department of Education and Youth Guidance and AI in Schools, a hugely important foundation. Again, it establishes safety, ethics, transparency, and human oversight as the pillars of AI in education, but, and I say this with genuine respect, it also raises more questions than it answers. Quite literally, the final pages of the report pose 26 thoughtful, reflective questions, but many of them are the very questions school leaders have been asking for the past 3 years, and I think perhaps we're hoping this guidance would begin to answer. Still, it gets the conversation started, and that in itself is valuable. This isn't a criticism of the team behind it. I couldn't envy what they had to do. The document itself is a solid and considered foundation, yet aside from its alignment with the EU AI Act and signposting to some genuinely useful IDRA resources developed in recent years, there's little that couldn't have been published 2 years ago, and we may have been able to start the broader discussions on these questions sooner. But I won't do the ChatGPT again, it's been failing me a little bit today. I was going to get it to summarize an article I posted on LinkedIn. It's been mixed, as is every use of it at this stage, and that's something you should learn about it. But the guidance itself is a welcome start. It's not the roadmap we need, though. And that's where leadership comes in, because frameworks don't create change, people do. And we have more scaffolding to draw on internationally too. So the draft OECD AI literacy framework for primary and secondary education helps define the core knowledge and dispositions learners need. It's also the one that's signposted in the guidance. So what I would assume is that once it's out of draft form, it's likely what the government will be using to try and implement in Ireland. UNESCO have an AI competency framework for learners, encourages understanding of how AI shapes knowledge and society. And the UNESCO AI competency framework for teachers focuses on integrating AI ethically and pedagogically. And together, these frameworks sketch a global consensus. AI in education should deepen learning, not distract from it, enhance learning, not replace it, and empower learners, not monitor them. These frameworks are a useful starting point for considering our own AI literacy and competence. But again, these frameworks don't live on paper, they live in practice. And that's the work of leadership. So here are a few focus areas that make it real. First, curriculum and learning. Map AI literacy to what we already value: creativity, citizenship, digital competence, and start asking, at what stage do we want pupils to learn about AI, and when or if they should begin to learn with AI? It's about sequencing, not saturation, and ensuring they use safe, age-appropriate, even locally tailored models. Next, professional learning. Use the UNESCO Teacher Competency Framework as a guide for staff development. The priority isn't compliance, it's confidence. Create protected spaces for teachers to explore tools safely and critically, and perhaps identify an internal AI lead to keep practice current. Governance and policy, this is where leadership judgment really matters. Apply the department's guidance and the principles of the EU AI Act when deciding what tools to use. Update your AUPs, check GDPR compliance, and make sure any tool used in your school has clear oversight. Translate from community engagement, translate AI literacy into plain English for pupils and parents. Reassure families about data safety and responsible use, and invite questions. Transparency builds trust. And finally, reflection and evaluation. Review and refine your school's AI use each year. Track the impact, not the novelty. What's saving time, what's improving learning, and what might need adjusting. Because that's how frameworks come alive, through steady, thoughtful leadership that learns as it goes. That's what turning policy into culture looks like. It's the messy, iterative work, but it's also leadership at its best. And to lead in this space, we don't need to have all the answers, but we do need to have the right posture. And I think there's 3 that matter most. Curious, not compliant. Leaders who explore before they adopt, who treat AI as a conversation, not a command. Ethical, not fearful. Leaders who are guided by values, not headlines, who can say both yes and no with equal confidence. And collective, not isolated. Leadership that shares the load across schools, staff, and systems, because no one should navigate this alone. These postures aren't technical skills, they're cultural habits. They're how we model the kind of digital citizenship we want our learners to inherit. And of course, we still need guardrails, the same simple principles that help us decide when to pause. There are 5 that I find particularly useful. Transparency. Can we explain how it works and why we're using it? Fairness. Does it serve all learners equally? Privacy. Are we protecting data and dignity? Well-being. Does it reduce stress or just add to it? And purpose. Is this helping learning or just speeding it up? If we can't answer those 5 questions well, we probably shouldn't proceed. They're not barriers to innovation, they're boundaries for integrity. Which brings us back to agency, the thread that runs through this whole talk. Agency isn't about control, it's about informed responsibility. It's what happens when knowledge, ethics, and collaboration meet. And as leaders, we don't just use AI, we shape the culture that surrounds it. We help our staff, pupils, and communities see that technology isn't destiny, it's design. And that's the real work of leadership in this moment, turning understanding into collective action, imagination into practice, and innovation into something deeply human. Because the story of AI in Irish education isn't a technical one, it's a story of leadership, about what we choose together. Now, I'm conscious of time here, so I think we'll skip past the next Menti. 2 minutes, okay. So if we look back over the past 40-odd minutes, we've actually traveled quite a distance. We began with reflection, the realities of leadership, the exhaustion, the sheer weight of what you carry. We moved into understanding, demystifying the technology, naming the fears and reclaiming a bit of agency. Then came imagination, exploring what might be possible if we shaped our digital futures with purpose and care. And finally, we arrived at leadership and agency, the human capacity to guide, to discern, to protect what's worth protecting. All of that brings us right here to this final piece, what we do with understanding and imagination. So let's take that forward and talk about what comes next. There are obvious challenges. Schools already struggle with digital infrastructure, inequitable access, and the absence of skilled administrative support. The idea of adding AI strategy to an already impossible list may seem unrealistic, but perhaps this is precisely where imagination comes in. What if we saw AI not as another burden, but as a chance to redesign leadership itself? To reclaim time, to reduce fatigue, and to recenter what matters most: people, learning, and care. None of this will happen by accident. Our digital futures will either be shaped for us or by us. The choice is ours. And that's where leadership, your leadership, truly matters. So if we're to shape these futures for ourselves, where do we begin? Start with literacy, not tools. Try small, safe pilots and share what you learn. Use AI to create space, not just speed. Model curiosity and caution in equal measure. And most importantly, do this work together. Because in the end, this isn't just about technology, it's about leadership. So my invitation to all of you is simple. Let's reimagine leadership in an age of intelligent tools. Let's be curious, critical, and creative in equal measure. And let's ensure that whatever technology evolves, the heartbeat of Irish education, our commitment to children, community, and care remains unmistakably human. Gurv Míle Magadh.